Hi, it's Sherry with Art at the Kirby Center again. We attacked drawing animals this week and using some watercolor and ink washes to brighten it up and explore sort of the science of paint. And this is the kind of creation we made. This particular one I'm going to walk through in the next few minutes with you. It's actually a collage where the background was a wash of wet on wet, and then the animals were added on top. It gives you a lot of flexibility to explore what kind of creatures, where to place them, how not to get all fussy about how the paint is going to run together and whatnot. So Aspen and Phoenix are going to join us. Oh, actually Aspen's gone to sleep, but they were there helping me along the way with all of this video. So I hope you enjoy it. So the first thing we're going to do is create our background. We've chosen to do butterflies. So my background is going to be green and blue, I think, but it's really just a wash. This is the most free, most non-judgmental portion of the project. And if you really dislike how it turns out, well, you just start again. So I've got watercolor paper. You can tape this directly to your tabletop, or if you have a small tabletop like I do and you can't move around it and you want to get on with the next phase, you might want to put it on a piece of board, piece of cardboard, anything so that as it sits and dries, you can move it nicely over to the counter somewhere while you continue working in your workspace. So I'm going to tape it down and get going. We have the paper all taped down. I'm going to wet this paper very thoroughly. A first pass with a wet brush is not really enough to make it as wet as I need it to go, but I do not want to scrub the watercolor paper. It will start to actually peel the top layer off, and then it won't absorb water and paint well at all. So I am quickly going over it so that it doesn't have time to dry. And it's amazing where you find funny little dry spots after you think you've painted it all. So go over it in another direction lightly without scrubbing. And now I have very wet. You can see now, you probably are starting to see, the paper is kind of starting to either cup or bow. This is why we taped it down, so that it wouldn't go totally like a roller coaster and have weird puddles. Then I want to take some of our brushes and look at an ink or watercolor and start to drop color in. I want mine to be, you can have yours quite scenic and specific. I just want to create flows of color. Now I urge you, I know like your younger self might have wanted to color this all in, but if you let the science of diffusion work with you, it will create beautiful, gentle amounts of color, and the way it moves in ways that you could not create yourself. And this is where that beautiful freedom comes in, because it's going to do what it does, and it's not really up to you. It's up to where the wetness is going to go and the concentration of the paint. And leave some white spots. Those always looks kind of cool. And if it needs some help, you can always give it a little bit of a tip. But I would not do that too much, because you go quickly from an interesting diffusion to, oh, look at that, it's mud. Yeah, okay. So I don't want my background to take away from the butterflies I'm going to put on there. So I might even diffuse it a little bit more, throw some water on. And there's another technique you can do at this point. You can scatter some salt. Will allow little starbursts of white to come through, but you can't see how there's a puddle here. It's actually like it's a puddle, like I could go splashing in my gumboots there. Don't put the salt there. It will just dissolve and make a salty puddle. But here, it is still wet and not puddly. That is where you could put the salt, or there, where it's not actually puddly, because the salt will be able to interact with the water and the paint properly. So I'm going to leave that be, and it'll change and diffuse a little bit more over time. And there we go. I'm going to use a reference photograph to capture the initial idea of the shape of a butterfly. Why? Because my butterflies always end up looking like funny blobby things, and I'd like them to look somewhat more butterfly-ish. Butterflies actually have these two parts to their wings, and I'm going to try and capture that. I'm not going to go slavishly about all of this, and I'm going to make a variety of butterflies. So I'm going to make one here, one. I'm going to cut them all out, so it doesn't really matter as long as I have space for them. So my first butterfly, I think I want it to be about this big, and I am going to start with general shapes. Now, if drawing is not your thing, and that has always been the barrier to you having success in art, this is a painting exploration, so you don't have to do a drawing. You can print this picture out off the internet and then trace it. You can pick it up and hold it up against the window and use the window as a light board that shines light through and allows you to see the image and trace it. Lots of different things you can do to just do the part you love. If the drawing itself is a creative process for you, I like to do the drawing part, but not everybody does. Don't make yourself crazy. So I've got those two wing shapes. When we do the painting. Now I'm going to do a couple of other butterflies. I'm going to have some flying around. So one is going to be smaller. I'm going to do a couple more butterflies flying around. So again, these are not placed where they're going to be. These are just on my page for drawing purposes. Okay, now see how I've started to do this butterfly, and I'm thinking, you know what, I'm starting to make a butterfly that looks like a little kid butterfly. One way to check to see if your shape of your creature is true, turn it upside down and compare it to the image that you may be referencing. For instance, my butterfly upside down would be like that. Does that look like this shape? Well, no. This is too symmetric. I think I'm going to take it in a little bit. And I'm going to slender that down. Butterflies are going to be monarchish, some sort of version of that. I'm going to be brave and bold and trace around it in black Sharpie. The Sharpie is not soluble, and so it's going to stay nice and crisp. And many examples of art should never have a big outline around it, and I would just cringe. But these particular creatures actually do, and it might help our process a little bit later. So if you're doing a realistic creature, this might not be the step you're going to do, but for mine, it's going to, I don't know, give it a little punch. I'm going to use the inks, and they're going to behave sort of like a watercolor. And I'll show you a couple of ideas about that if you're not familiar with working with watery medium. You could also do them in pencil crayon or felt pen or anything at all, because it's the contrast of the animal on top of that wash that is very intriguing to the eye. So I'm going to do mine though as a watercolory type thing using my inks. I'm going to use my palette or a towel, oh my goodness, my palette or my plate, and I'm going to drop a small amount of ink onto my palette. And that is highly concentrated. Now, I'm going to show you how we can use the paper that we've got with all our creatures on it as a testing board as well as our final painting. Because we're going to cut these creatures out, half this paper is just nothing. It's going to get recycled or made into something else. I don't want to mess up my butterfly, but I'm going to use the paper next to the butterfly as a testing ground. The straight up ink I'm going to use is quite bright, and I can use my clean water to water it down. I'm going to take a clean brush and introduce water onto my palette and use that as something to water it down. And I can use this wet on wet. As long as it's still wet, I can drop another color into it. Look, I've got a little bit of purple here. And if I drop the purple into it, it will diffuse. Wowee, that's really super dark, isn't it? I can also diffuse or dilute, water down a little bit of that purple, since it's so dark, before I drop it in, and see what we get. And it just does its thing. It's so cool. That's what I'm going to use, and now I'm going to paint my butterfly. One last thing. I also want to make sure that I include some hint of my background in here. I'm going to include a little hint of the turquoise. Even though I wouldn't say that monarch butterflies are turquoise, I'm going to see some version of turquoise reflected into my creature from the light around it, and it'll help it harmonize and just not be some weird thing sitting on top of that background. So here goes. Pigment, and it looks wow, that's like so little kid all painted in. I can go back in with my fine artistic tool, my paper towel, and take some of that pigment off, and then it's much more intriguing. Okay, so I'm going to do that with that one. I'm going to make all the butterflies a little different. So I let the purple touch the wet, and now it's going to bleed in just a little bit. I think this one's going to be way more interesting than my first one. Now, the fact that my first one, frankly, isn't all that interesting, I don't have to be done with the first one. I can go back in a little bit and re-wet it and add another layer of color to it. I think that one, I think that one's going to have a little bit of turquoise. All right, and I'm going to leave that alone and let it do its thing. And now for the last butterfly that was my first and my weird flower on it. Let's see what we can do. Oh, shucks. So, Aspen and Phoenix and I enjoyed that experience with some art today, and I thought I would just show you some other pieces that were done in cooperation with other Kirby residents. We did, oh yeah, nope, don't lose your mind. We did dogs, and I will attach some drawing suggestions about how to capture an in-perspective dog. Until I started learning to draw in perspective, all of my dogs look like dachshunds with teeny tiny little legs. And we did some humorous ones. This ridiculous sheep with her tongue out. I don't know, made me smile. Don't do it. And this beautiful little chickadee who spoke to me. And residents also did cats and other sheep and other dogs, and it made me happy. So I hope that you dive in and do something that makes you happy as well. Take care.